Thank you for taking the time to attend today's webinar on Infor CloudSuite differences related to supply management, where we're going to look at the differences between Lawson version 10 and CloudSuite Financials and Supply Management version 11. And with that, I give you Brittany and Sarah.
Thanks, Keith. So we're going to talk about CloudSuite differences, focus on the supply chain management portion of it. Just to get us started, we're an Infor Alliance partner. We're here in Baltimore headquarters, where we're actually filming today. Founded back in 1999, so we've been around for a while, but we're ever growing. We've got locations now in Tampa, we've got an image now practice in Kansas City, and we're constantly adding new people and new knowledge, right?
Of course. All right, on the agenda today, we're going to go through some navigation changes, some universal features, inventory management, got some exciting stuff in there, requisitions, purchasing, and finally contract management.
So to start off, we're just going to talk a little bit about the navigation. So one of the things you'll first notice when you're getting in is usually you're accustomed to having those mingle buttons up at the top of your screen. They're now going to be a drop down, so you'll have all of your modules right down in this drop down, multiple pages that you can scan through, and it's going to have everything you need all in one place. And it saves you that real estate that you used to use on the top of the bar, which is kind of big. So now it's in this drop down menu, and you can have more than just the few at the top. You can have everything all in one place. So if you've used the flow chart in the past, like ICFL or POFL, it's still going to be accessible for you, but the way that everything is kind of managed is in this flowchart file structure. So if you're looking at, here, you've got supply management setup, looking at groups and companies, go to item groups. Everything's kind of got that file structure, very organized for you if you don't know what you're looking for, but you'll always have that search option so you can look for the titles of those pages now.
Yep, so one of the big changes is form numbers are going away. So those, yeah. I know, you've probably all just finally gotten them memorized.
Yeah, that lost in brain.
Yeah, but the tokens are going to become a thing of the past, but don't be nervous. Everything will be found through search by keyword. And when you think about it, that's probably much more similar to all of the other platforms and applications that you're comfortable and familiar with using today, instead of essentially an acronym followed by some seemingly random numbers sometimes.
Yeah. If you know what you're looking for, you can type it in.
Exactly. So. And to help with this transition, essentially every role has their own out-of-the-box customizable landing page. So instead of, coming in the morning, I remember I used to just start out my day by opening up a whole bunch of different tabs and, typing in the token for all the screens that I used to use. I'd bring up IC11 and then I'd want an IC12 open and then a PO13 and maybe a PO25. You don't have to do that anymore. It's all going to be available on your landing page, and we should be saying configurable here instead of customizable, so I apologize. Everything about that will be configurable, but it does come with, out of the box screens that are common for that role. So that's really going to help in that transition away from the tokens. It just makes everything a lot more organized and orderly and systematic for navigation through the system.
Right.
So this is what your landing page might look like. It's just an example. So you just kind of have everything here in a one-stop shop. And not only can you just click right into these forms, but you can see kind of a list of unreleased purchase orders. So it's a much more user-friendly dashboard that you're going to have access to now.
You can move things around so you can play with it a little bit to make it better for you, your work process. So something that's changing a little bit is this drill around function. So right now you're kind of used to the static information that you're given when you drill around on something, and this is a lot more dynamic, which can be very helpful. So what I mean by that is that when you click on a field and you're drilling around, if you're looking through specific information and you click on it, it's actually going to take you to that record, so you can even get more information from that form, but you're not going away from the original record that you were drilling around. So you're not getting lost in the system, you're not cycling through different file locations only to come back to the same file location. You can go direct to the source. So it's not just static, it's a lot more dynamic.
All right, now we're going to move on to some universal features. So this role-based functionality is going to be available now, and this ties into those, the dashboard or the landing page that we were just talking about. So all the security roles now come with preset role-based access. If a user has multiple roles, they're able to switch between those two by using a drop-down feature at the top, so that they can access all of the forms that they need for each role. And you can just see kind of a list here of all of the different roles that have been established and what they have access to. Application administrator is basically the carte blanche. You would have access to everything. And then, buyer, you have your normal processing of purchase requests and creating POs, so on and so forth. Supply management administrator is a lot like application administrator, but it's narrowed down to just the supply management menus only. It doesn't include finance.
And the nice thing is you don't have to sign out every time.
Exactly. So this button up here at the top left of the screen, the requester drop modeled so nicely by Brittany, is where you would toggle between those two different roles if you had multiple roles in your landing page. So again, all of the roles are assigned out of the box, displays here on the landing page, and it's really easy to configure this. If the out of the box configuration doesn't suit your needs, it's easy to change so that you're able to just log in and see everything that you need to perform your functions.
But you're not starting from scratch, which is always helpful.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so these dynamic attributes are something that we kind of call them because we weren't sure what to call them. But what this is it's just a bunch of information. Specifically, contact information is the most applicable in this sense. But if you have a lot of contact information, you're going to connect it to your employee information record. And what that does is this attribute is just a bunch of recurring details that kind of cascade down to the business classes. And the business classes are just another word for your database tables. That's what it's being called in Landmark. So if you've got your name, your phone number, your email address, and you've got it in your buyers or your requester or your contacts for contract management, you don't have to maintain 20 different records for the same person if that person left or if you're changing the individual who's the contact. You just put it in that employee information record, you attach it to these specific roles and these specific identities, and it'll just cascade right over for you. So a little less maintenance.
A lot
everyone could always use less maintenance.
Yeah, if you remember in the past, there are just so many different areas where it's possible to enter contact information. Nothing linking those.
Yeah, a lot of people wouldn't use it for that reason.
So if something changed, phone number changed, email changed, it was almost impossible to go in and sweep through the system and make sure that you were updating every single one of those fields that contained that contact information. And now, using these dynamic attributes, it's all tied together, so one update will carry through to all of those locations.
Yeah.
And we also have wizards, so that's pretty exciting. Wizards are probably a concept that most of you are already familiar with. You've maybe use them in one of the Microsoft Suite applications that you use on a regular basis. And it works the exact same way. So they're now going to exist throughout supply management, including contract management, purchasing, and requisitions. And it's going to streamline the various processes. It basically steps you through all of the required components. For example, if you're creating a purchase order, the wizard is going to take you through a 3-step process of first creating the header, then creating the lines, and finally viewing and releasing the purchase order. And Yeah, I think that's a big win, especially if you're training or onboarding new people, getting them familiarized with the Lawson system, Infor Lawson system, and the process. Having this kind of built-in guide is going to be really helpful and a big time saver.
Yeah, and then once you get used to it, you can just go back to the regular one, and you don't have to use this, or you can continue using it.
Right.
Whatever you see fit.
All right, valid units of measure. So previously, you could essentially pull up any valid unit of measure that was built in the system, right, for any item whatsoever. Now, the system is only going to display for you the valid units of measure for that item master, which is really helpful. And if we move on to the next slide, this is an example of what that would look like if you were adding an item to a purchase order. It's only going to display these units of measure that are built in that IC11 unit of measure structure, which we won't be calling IC11 anymore.
The item master record.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just an example of what it'll look like, and it's nice, especially in Rqc, which
we'll talk about later.
But it's especially nice there because you really only have the option of choosing a valid unit of measure instead of seeing everything,
and then
maybe picking the wrong one, and then getting an error and not being able to proceed.
All right, so a little bit has changed with the description fields. If you've watched the version 10 differences that I've done quite a few times, I talk a lot about that long description 3 that's extended to 350 characters. So they've kind of responded to that in that description 1 and 2 they've now extended as well. So description 1 and 2 used to be 30 characters, and they've now increased both of them equally to 60. So that's a total of 120 characters on description 1 and 2. And what that really helps with is the fact that you don't have to use abbreviations as much. You can fit it all in one. Let's be honest, you see description 1 the most, and that's the one that you find specifically in your requisitions and your purchase orders and things like that. So that's what, it's definitely going to be helpful in that, and also in your synonyms, you don't have to get those synonyms for the abbreviations that you're creating. But you'll still have that long description 3, put in the vendor information, any other information that doesn't fit into the first 2 descriptions. All right, so we want to talk about the accounting structure because it's very different in CloudSuite. We're not going to get totally into it because it's more on the finance side. They make the decisions for you, but it is something you see if you're doing purchase orders and requisitions. So the GL string is all on one screen, but the biggest thing is that if you look here, just distribution account, you've got ledger, business entity, cost center, account, project, grant. Those are all configurable so that your finance is going to decide actually even what the names are going to be. It's not just straightforward accounting unit, account, sub-account. You can incorporate your project, you can incorporate an account, you can use the term cost center so that it kind of goes across and makes sense to everyone. Yep. But it's not going to exactly look like this, so it will be dependent on how finance sets it up for you, but we just want to share that it's going to be and look a little bit different just so that you're aware.
And I think that's one of the nicest things because, let's face it, everybody says cost center.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier, especially when you're trying to get someone new acquainted with, how the system works and the terminology.
Yeah.
If you're able to call it what everyone's calling it anyway.
It's a lot more intuitive.
Exactly. All right, attachments. So this is pretty exciting. Pictures can now be attached to the item, vendor, inventory location, requesting location, and contract. So you have a lot more options. You can just go crazy with pictures. It's pretty cool. And you can attach the picture to employee, which will display for requester and the buyer, so that's nice. It's a lot easier to add the attachment, so that's good because I know that's been a barrier to some organizations adopting the addition of pictures to their item master and things like that in the past. You can also just do a URL upload to get all of those into the system.
It's a lot easier than it was before.
Exactly.
I'm going to ask a question, maybe one I'm not sure about is, there's a button there that says sync item information. Do we know what that's intended to do? Not yet.
Item information.
Yeah.
I do not off the top of my head, but that's
that'll
a
be a
great
follow-up.
question.
That will be a
Yeah.
follow-up question.
Hopefully something useful.
Yeah.
All right, and we also have sample document templates. This is something that, you know, I think most folks who might be using contract management today are probably already familiar with. It can be used for contracts, purchase orders, intercompany billing invoices with variables. It works with Spreadsheet Designer templates, and it's basically you can also create fact sheet documents describing the process in detail. So basically you can use this to make a more attractive, more easily readable and comprehensible purchase order. We all know that the just basic way that the system issues POs is kind of ugly, not always
Not the
easy to
prettiest.
understand exactly when you're looking at it, picking out where the key information that you're looking for is. So this is a nice, easy way of creating a more aesthetically pleasing display of that data. And it basically gets mapped into these fields just like you would do with a mail merge. You can upload documents, and there's, you know, basic extra information that's kind of like field help also that's available.
There's a lot of sample stuff that comes with it, but also some customizable things.
Right, exactly.
All right, so Spreadsheet Designer is just like your Microsoft add-ins. If you've already got some products on Landmark, you will be aware of this. But if you're just starting in Landmark, Spreadsheet Designer is just your add-ins configuration.
But better.
But better, that's very true. So the biggest change is that Control-Shift-Click is how you're gonna get your information. And it looks just like this. You're gonna get your business class name, which we talked about as your database tables. You're gonna get your form numbers, field description, sizing, things like that. You'll still get all of that information in a nice pop-up, not just at the bottom. And that's how you're gonna get your information, but what's great about Spreadsheet Designer is that you don't have to do that F-field mapping thing. You can just kind of figure out that it's, okay, this is the form name. Oh, so I map it to the form name. So as simple as that, it's a lot easier. We're not gonna go too in depth on this, but we do have a webinar that Jackie and Chris did a while ago. It's on RPI's YouTube channel, so if you wanna check that out and get a little bit more information on it, please do.
It's excellent.
Yeah,
so
it's a really good one.
check it out if you have the time.
All right, so now into inventory management.
All right. So this is awesome for any of you listening in today who are responsible for MMIS maintenance, you know, maintaining the item master. This is going to be huge for you. There's now a maintain item worksheet. So all item related records can now be added and or updated from a central location, and that includes vendor items, units of measure, item locations, all the item fields. It's a one-stop shop, and it just goes throughout the system instead of having this checklist every time you need to make a change, you need to make sure that change is made in all of these different fields. There's now one place that you can make all of those changes, which is excellent.
And you can view all of it in one place too, not just making the changes.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you're not inquiring, you know, 4 or 5 different screens to get the information that you need for a particular item. Contracts that contain the item are also then automatically updated, which is another huge win.
Yeah.
And having everything tied in together, and that'll kind of...
Yeah, we'll talk about the contracts in a little bit, because
Exactly.
that's somewhat of a change as well.
Yep, so item management is streamlined, and it's going to be a huge value add for everyone.
Yeah, I definitely see that.
And also copy items. So now this copy item action includes the ability to copy the item location and the item location reorder information as well. It's great for if you are adding items in like
different
a
sizing.
series, right? Exactly. You have a whole line of screws, and apart from the size, they're all the same.
Yep.
That's going to make it much, much easier, or dealing with conversions, things like that, where you're going to be copying a lot of that information over. It's really going to save time for rebuilding all of those reorder points and having to deal with rebuilding the item location, and then, you know, adding the source information all over again too.
Yeah, definitely makes things a little bit quicker. All right, so your inventory transactions, you used to go to a bunch of different screens. I'd see 20, 21, 24, but now you've got this one screen called inventory transaction, and you can do everything from one place. So you can do your adjustments, your receipts, your issues, your transfers. You can do it all from one spot. You just change your document type. The form may change a little bit depending on the transfer or the transaction itself. But everything's in one place. It all looks the same. So you kind of know what you need to input, and you can make it very quick for different things that you're doing at one time. There's no default either, so you can choose anything you want just from the drop down there. All right, so requisitions. Now, some of you will see that we put RQ and RSS. Well, you're used to seeing RQC, but we're going old school again, and we're going back to requisition self-service. So if you've been with Lawson for a while, you might remember when it was RSS, and they switched it to RQC, but we're going back to it. So the biggest thing is that there aren't a lot of changes with requisition self-service from what a lot of you recognize now, especially since they've got that Rqc dashboard right now. It's kind of like these dashboards here, my requisitions, my shopping lists, which is just your templates. So the biggest change here is just the fact that it's called RSS.
All right, and requisition status, this is a change. But it's a really great one for satisfying your customers as far as end users and requesters. So the requisition statuses are now going to incorporate much more specific and familiar language, such as delivered or waiting for PO. Previously, the statuses were unreleased or needs approval or processed or closed, but that processed status,
what does that mean?
Encompassed so many different potential actual states. It just didn't really deliver much information to the end user or the requester when they're trying to figure out what the status of their order is. So I think this will be a big crowd pleaser for that reason, and it'll also be easier for them to access that information.
Yeah, your users can actually see this information, which a lot of times they're the ones that are like, where's my stuff? Where is it?
They pick up the phone and they call someone. Yeah. Or they send an email, and then you have multiple different people involved in the process of just providing an update on a requisition status. So that really should become a thing of the past with this feature.
Especially the delivered, you can actually say, oh, it's actually here, I just haven't received it, so maybe if I wait a little longer, I'll get it. So more information is always good. All right, so the Rqc Config File, if you've ever had to touch it, sometimes some people may think that you need to be able to code in order to configure your Rqc.
It looks scary.
So if you've been in there, this is going to look a lot easier for you because Lawson actually put a lot of the changes that you make in the configuration file, they've just directly put it into Lawson as specific fields. So you don't have that configuration file anymore. You don't need to touch it. You just have the fields, you enter things in there, you touch the user settings. But the biggest thing that I think a lot of people are gonna like is the fact that you can actually configure those fields to hide or specifically show certain fields. So if you're not using sourcing event as a field, or you're not using commodity codes, but when your requesters are going through it, they're like, well, should I put something in here? The field's there. Now you can just hide it so you don't get those questions. You don't have to confuse anyone. You can actually just hide easily what you don't want them to see. So before it took a little more effort to be able to do that, and now it's just with a click of the button, you can make a change one day and put it back the next.
Yeah, and there's no more anxiety about going into the config file and I made a typo and therefore something is broken, because now it's just a drop-down menu.
Exactly. And that kind of lends itself to the punch-out configuration because the same thing goes. You used to have to go into the configuration file, touch it with different fields, put in your network IDs, your shared secrets, your passwords. But now they've got their own fields. You've got that field mapping tab, some other attribute tabs. They're all in one place, easily configurable in there, and makes things, if Punch-Out wasn't already pretty easy to install, they've made it that much easier for you. So this is definitely a nice improvement. And here's just an example of the Punch-Out configuration. So DUNS number, you've got, once you've added the Punch-Out vendor itself and the information there, it'll light up those field mapping, and you can add requesters as Punch-Out. So all in one place.
Yep, walks you through the much more user-friendly.
Oh yeah. All right, so on to purchasing.
All right, so this is something that I think receiving departments everywhere will be really excited about. The PO number alone is now the unique and only identifier required for the purchase order.
Right.
The PO codes still exist, they're still there, but they are no longer required for unique identification of that purchase order. You know, I don't think there is anyone who's been on, you know, Infor Lawson for more than a hot minute who hasn't experienced the vendor accidentally leaving off their PO code and resulting in some confusion for the receiver because they're trying to pull up the order and take care of business and doesn't show up. Maybe they are able to do the research themselves. Maybe they shuffle it off to someone else. Now that problem will be a thing of the past. So if they forget that on the packing slip, it's not going to make any difference, because as long as that PO number is there, the receiver will be able to pull it up without any sort of issue. And there won't be any resulting confusion or, you know, bringing other people into the process and adding time there.
Yeah, and it definitely helps because you can still use it for reporting. That's not going away. That's pretty much the biggest reason people use PO codes is for that reporting purpose and that identification. So you still have it. It's just not a requirement. If you forget to put it on the first purchase order, you can still add it to that same purchase order number after the fact.
And it can be changed, which is huge, because before, once it was set,
it's set.
that was it forever.
Yeah, so we're really excited, as you can tell, very passionate about this change.
So purchase requests. So now you'll be able to filter or sort by list view header for all PO requests in PO23. PO23 is going to look a little bit different, but this is what we're talking about when we say list view header here. And also another nice feature that comes along with this is that an error notice is provided for what's missing in order to create the PO. And, you know, so it basically will bring up an alert if, you know, the vendor, the buyer, the early delivery date hasn't been entered, all of those missing components needed to let it flow into PO20. And also the wizards come back into play here. So when you select create purchase order, a wizard will pop up with the necessary fields in order to complete that order and make it into a PO. So it's another opportunity to have that assistant just kind of step you through the process.
So there's just an example of that error code.
It's nice that it tells you exactly what's missing.
All right, so on the receiving, there's something slightly new, and this is another improvement for your receivers, is the fact that here you can see the purchase order receipt detail. You've got two tabs here. One's your PO lines and one's your receipt lines. Those are being kept separate so that you see here, this is what's on the PO, this is what I'm expecting. But then you've also got your receipt lines. So that's actually showing what you've received in separate from PO. So it's not that overlapping information where you're not always sure if you've already received it in or if it's just what the PO information is giving you. And this is definitely it's going to help with those accidental duplicate receipts, because it definitely happens because of that. So this is going to help segregate that information and make things a lot easier.
Right, and that's nice because, you know, that happens a lot of the time, and then they're, you know, why haven't we been invoiced for this?
Yeah.
And things get confusing, or, you know, the remaining quantity on the line shows up later, but they can't receive it because there was an accidental duplicate receiver answered earlier. No more.
No more. All right, so contract management. This is a big change, but again, just a title change to some degree. So you're using PO25, your vendor agreements now. This is now actually just all contract management. So if you've got contract management and you've bought it as a separate module, or you're using it as a separate module and you're integrating it with the Lawson system in S3, you've now got it completely embedded all together. So your vendor agreements are your contract management. You don't have to worry about those AGS calls between the system. Things are just very streamlined. You've got the same tables, making things a lot quicker, a lot more efficient.
Yep. All right, so standing and blanket contracts. The contract number and the PO code, which is now optional, will store in the header of every single PO. There'll be a unique PO number for every order that goes out, and the release number stays with the contract and obviously increases incrementally with every new order. So this is really going to help streamline things. Sorry, our screen just blinked out there for a second. So the benefits from the purchasing side are managing the PO information is going to be a lot clearer and more streamlined. And then also from the AP side, there are considerations there where if the vendor doesn't include the release number on the PO, you can still match the order because of that unique PO number that's going to be used and affiliated with that.
Just highlighting it.
And we also have some information about contract group customizations. You can customize contract groups based on their business needs. The organization only needs to display processes that are actually used. So, you know, there's kind of a theme throughout this of
kind of like an
really,
Rqc,
exactly,
RSS.
really being able to easily configure and only display the information that's going to be pertinent for each of these business processes and the users. And it really just makes things a lot more straightforward. You can get those fields out of there that you aren't using because they do end up being confusing to some folks. And it also just kind of creates visual clutter. So you're going to have the same flexibility indicating what will show on the contract wizard.
Making the system work for you.
Exactly.
Really.
And more easily.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so do we have any questions? No? All right. Keith?
All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate the time. Got some questions.
I knew they would come
They'll
in.
come.
There couldn't be none, I was sure.
Yeah.
So there's a question about the RQ500 process. So RQ500 itself doesn't the form number doesn't exist, but all the import programs are still there. We've done some preliminary research. So, you know, technically it's a different platform than the system is on, but all the basics are exactly the same, right? So all those things would transfer over. As far as we know, there's one hospital that's live on this, which is Palos Health. I think it's up outside of Chicago. And there's quite a few that are in progress. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time to attend this webinar today.